All right. So, thank you. So today we have Naresh Uncle on the podcast. First of all, thank you so much, Uncle, for coming on. And I'll let you do your introduction to yourself. But you're someone I've known pretty much my whole life, and you've had a profound impact on my life in many ways that we can get into, as well as I know you have on a lot of other people as well. And I mean, you've had a lot of vast experience in engineering and consulting in many different fields, working in Hong Kong, in Vancouver as well, currently residing in North Vancouver, but I'll throw it back to you for an introduction to yourself.
Okay, Asa, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share some of my experiences over the last almost 70 years. Out of that, no, it's 77 years. Out of that, almost 50 years in engineering. And all the kind words that have been an influence in your life. Not quite sure what I said or what I did, but it's always nice to hear. I am Naresh Koirala, born and raised in Kathmandu, Nepal for many years, up to until I was 17, I think. And then I went to study engineering in India. At the time, there were no engineering colleges in Nepal. So I was reasonably good at maths and science, and then I won a scholarship. Those days it used to be called Colombo Plan Scholarship. The government of India provided the scholarship, and then I went to what is now called IIT Roorkee, Institute of Engineering, Roorkee in India. And after a 4 years degree in civil engineering, I went back to Nepal, worked for Nepal government's roads department for about 5-6 years. Somehow none of that quite fitted what I wanted to do and my sense of life, what life should be, what an engineer's life should be. And so I was not quite happy there. And then in 1971, I won a United Nations scholarship to do photogrammetry in the United States and worked for the U.S. Highway Department for about a year. And then when that program was over, that program, just going to the United States, in a way changed my life because it was.
And
at
where
the
where
time-
was it in the United States?
Sorry?
Where was it in the United States?
I was traveling across the country
Okay.
doing photogrammetry, which is, I don't know whether you know what photogrammetry is, but it's preparing contour maps, topographic maps from aerial photographs. So that's what I was doing. And I was saying that the stay in the United States changed my life in the sense it was at the time when I left the US. I hiked around Europe for a couple of months, and then I decided that I wanted to do engineering and see the world through engineering. And so I went back to Nepal. I had itchy feet already. I wanted to do something. And I realized that if I to make myself or engineering marketable for me, I had to have a higher degree. So once again, I was very fortunate to win a scholarship to study in Asian Institute of Technology in Bangkok, Thailand, where I was for 2 years. Did masters in soil engineering. At the time, it used to be called soil engineering. Now they say geotechnical engineering.
Yeah.
And then my journey started. Real engineering journey started. I worked in Thailand for another year, and then went to work in Iran, and then in Hong Kong for many years, and now in Canada. And so Canada happens to be the 7th country that I've lived and worked. So that's who I am. That's what, briefly, that's an encapsulation of almost 50 years of engineering and 77 years of my life.
We can't encapsulate that in a couple of minutes, but you did your best there, I think. So one thing I'm curious about is, so you have lived in many different countries. You've also traveled around to other countries as well. And I want to touch on some cultural differences that you may have noticed in the workplace in some different countries, and how someone might adapt to this in a global environment where you have to be more culturally aware.
Well, there are, as engineering, no engineering, cultural differences are everywhere. But we as human beings, I felt that after traveling and interacting with people from all over the world, from so many different countries, and even in those countries, there would be people from outside. Like in Iran, I worked with the Brits, with Iranians, with Germans, all from different parts of the world. So there's one thing that binds us together, and that's humanity. And if you think of that, if you consider humanity as the core of your value and life's focus, then the cultural differences are there, but you can deal with them quite easily and confidently. But if you just focus on cultural difference and try to do the right or what you consider to be wrong, right, or right, wrong, then quite often you'll make mistakes and you'll upset the other people. So be sensitive to cultural differences, try and understand them, but at the core, know that you're dealing with human beings, and we are all together as one human being, as one humanity. And with that as a core value, I think you sail through quite well, and I feel I have.
Nice. Yeah. And that brings me to another point. So, what are some of the more difficult challenges that you've faced in your career? And are they more technical, or are they more along the lines of what we just talked about, where they might be related to personal, cultural differences and communication with others?
I never really, wherever I went, it took me some time to understand the culture of the local people. Like in Thailand, you won't go, and it took me a while to find that out, but you won't go and put your hand over somebody's head. That will be sacrilegious. That will be very offensive. That's because they think, most of the Thai people wear a Buddha locket around their neck, and then your hand over that would be considered hand over Buddha, and therefore you don't do it. That's a no-no. So these subtle things you need to learn, and you need to be aware, and you need to respect. And so I feel I don't think I had ever any serious cultural issues, or that hampered my work or that worried me, although I was always careful. But the work itself, I'm a geotechnical engineer, and I deal with the earth. Everything that you see built around you is built on ground, and the ground itself is not like steel, concrete. It was not manufactured in a laboratory. It was created. It is a geological process in which we had no control over. So my job as a geotechnical engineer was always to predict the ground, how it will behave when it comes under some sort of a load, when it is used as an engineering material. And because it is not made by man, then that prediction becomes quite challenging, because when it was formed, you had no control over it.
Yeah.
And that created a lot of challenges, just the ground conditions. Like one example I'll give you, which you would be glad you're hearing this after the event. But I was doing a tunnel under Highway 1 here in Vancouver, and then about 2/3 of the way through the tunnel collapsed suddenly. And then there was people who were working in the tunnel. They ran out of the tunnel. Thankfully, nobody was hurt. And then I had to make a decision on what to do next. So that is a challenge. And then we saw, without going into the detail, we solved the problem. But then for 6 months or to a year, I was worried. Okay, we solved the problem. The cars started running running on the road again. The trucks started thundering on the road. But is the hole that, when the tunnel collapses, the hole that it created, is that been filled completely? Because the solution to the problem was filling that hole. And it had to be done. We didn't see the hole being filled. We're just pouring some concrete from the top. But is it done completely? If not, what happens? So every time I was driving over on that road, it used to worry me. But nobody knew, everybody else was driving happily, but I was the only one who was worried. So there are these challenges, quite a lot of challenges like that. At one time in another tunnel, a $5 million machine got stuck under the highway. And the contractor said to me, well, you're the designer, you tell me what I do now. So I had to find a solution. There were a lot of sleepless nights. And then finally we found a solution and it worked. So there are challenges, but technical challenges are what they are. That's why it's interesting. And that's why we do what we do, because
Yes, yeah.
otherwise life becomes boring if you do not have the challenge.
Exactly. And it's interesting when you brought that point. They always say ignorance is bliss. So sometimes if you don't know
Yeah,
the true intricacies of something, you might be able to.
Indeed.
So now stepping forward a bit, so throughout your entire career, so how would you say that engineering as an overall field has changed over the years?
Well, that's an interesting question. Over the years, it all depends on when you want to go back. Amongst the first, I would say that amongst the first engineers were the Egyptians who were building that pyramid. They introduced survey in their work.
Yeah.
That's how it started. Of course, I'm talking about civil engineering. That's what I know. There are other fields of engineering I can't talk about. I don't know much. But then from there, then it was only in 1828, I think, that the term civil engineer was coined. Before that, there was nothing called civil engineering. The word engineering itself, I think in Latin, it comes from the word Latin, which is ingene, which means to make, to create.
To create. I was just looking up it, to create.
Yeah, to create. And so the association of engine with engine, and then from engine comes engineer. And then, then the first engineers were all military engineers. Then comes civil engineering. And then in my lifetime, the most remarkable change in engineering has been the arrival of ecological environmental consciousness. That's A. And the two, B, is in old days there were good grounds everywhere to construct.
Yes. Yeah.
Now that's all changed because the increasing population, a lot of good grounds have been used already. So engineering now has to be done in poor conditions, close to the sea, in very soft soil, like in Bangkok or in Mexico.
Yeah.
And so engineering has evolved to deal with that. And that's where geotechnical engineering comes, because there was no geotechnical engineering before.
Right.
First of all, engineering in Egyptian time was more rule of a thumb. Then there's nothing to back up how the pyramid was built. What was the load that the stones were carrying? These days, engineering will be backed up by science, by theory, and all of that. Now, coming to environment, which is where I was earlier, people have since mid 1900s. When I went to engineering school in 1962, and there when we're doing cost estimation for a project, we would do cost benefit analysis. And in that cost benefit analysis, you will take into account only the capital cost required to construct and perhaps a bit of the maintenance cost, but nothing else. Now with environmental engineering coming, how does it destroy the nature? You can't do engineering, civil engineering, until somehow you disturb the nature. And so that's a challenge.
Yeah.
And that challenge is now a real challenge because you have to deal with it. You have to have an answer to it. That's why environmental assessment becomes an important part of engineering now. How do you protect fish? That's an important ecology. There was a project here in Vancouver, a tunnel project, where, when to start the tunnel, we had to delay that by 6 months because when we wanted to start the tunnel, next to the site where, all the activities would be, was a tree where there's birds nesting. And there was a time when these nesting birds will breed. And our projected starting time in the beginning sort of coincided with, overlapped with the breeding time. And we could not disturb the bird and the breeding. And therefore, the whole millions of dollars of project had to be postponed because of it. And there was another project where there was a lady used to come. Next to our site was a pond where ducks used to, there are a lot of ducks, and an old frail lady used to come every morning, it would appear, it turned out, to feed the ducks. And she started complaining that because of the vibration caused by our work, the ducks were disturbed, and so we had to do something about it. And that had to be addressed. So people have become environmentally conscious. Engineering does a lot of environmental disruption. It pollutes the air, it causes noise. And that had to be addressed. That is, I think, one of the major changes that engineering practice now has to deal with. And so all of these disciplines, ecologists, environmentalists, apart from others, become a part of the engineering team, modern engineering.
Would you say then that the discipline has become more interdisciplinary?
Engineering has become very interdisciplinary. We're in this house. Just look at it this way. How many tradesmen have been involved in this construction? It's like, this is like your body. You have a frame, you have a skin, and you have, there's plumbing, water supply, sewer, like the veins in your body, and they run all over the place. You have temperature, heat, heating the house. So I can go on and on, but it's almost, and all of that is specialist trade. And apart from that, the other part of the exciting and challenging part of engineering is all of these things have to come together at a certain specified time.
Yes, yeah.
To make it happen. And they come from various sources. So supply chain becomes such an important thing. We talk a lot about supply chain these days. But just imagine a major building these days. The construction, the electricity, there's climate control, there's plumbing, there is all kinds of materials. I was at a remote sort of involvement in construction of the Hong Kong Bank in Hong Kong, the main building there. I was not directly involved, but I used to attend seminars, etc. But the bank building was, wind tunnel, because how the building will perform when there is typhoon. So that had to be tested in a tunnel. The wind tunnel was in Chicago. And the cladding for the building came from some other part of the world. But all of these things have to come together in a specified time. If they did not, the whole work will be stalled. So just imagine managing all of that.
Yeah.
And then ultimately producing a product which the public likes, which functions, which looks architecturally satisfying, aesthetically pleasing. And that's engineering.
It's we often, especially infrastructure, buildings, we take a lot of that for granted, I think. And even modern engineering, a lot of some of these newer fields of engineering take what they're working in, why they're able to do what they're doing for granted. And this is the type of engineering I always say, like infrastructure, anything surrounding, building, creating, that's been around for not even decades, hundreds of thousands of years. And people take that for a little bit of granted just because of what we have now. And that's, I think, one constant is the innovator's ability to create and think about very different ideas. And I think that's like one thing that hasn't changed despite all the changes that you mentioned.
Yeah, that's right. That's why it's so creative. Just the roads that we drive on every day. We don't even take notice, never think how that is constructed. So much science goes into it.
Yes. Yeah.
So much engineering goes into it. And over the years, the structure of the road, the pavement itself, the design has evolved, so much, and the user has no clue. Most of the users
Yes,
have no
yeah.
clue, and that is quite interesting, fascinating. I think if we knew what we do, not just engineering, what you do, what the other guy on the street does, then we will have so much more mutual respect
Yes, yeah.
as individuals and as professions. Sadly, that's lacking sometimes.
It is lacking. And I think there are certain fields that take the brunt of it. I have a lot of friends in trades and construction who are do immensely great work, and this is work that can't be automated easily. Requires hard, dexterous labor, a lot of thought, and a lot of times people don't appreciate them as much as they should. Not near as much.
Yeah. So to go back to your question, when civil engineering was identified and started first, it was defined, and I thought this question might come. So just to make sure that I have the right words, I actually made a note of it, and it was defined as initially in 1828, when the Institution of Engineers, the first institution of engineer in the UK, was chartered. The definition of engineering was the art of directing the resources of power in nature for the use and convenience of man. Now note, there is no mention of protecting the nature. It is all for man. And then in 1826, they changed that. And then look at this again. Even after that change, professional and systematic engineering is professional and systematic application of science to the efficient utilization of natural resources to produce wealth.
Wealth.
That is the definition of engineering. That was. Now it's very different.
Yeah.
We have a responsibility to protect nature, to work with the environment. Nature is a gift that we respect and we honor, whereas in old days, it was something to exploit to create wealth to the benefit of mankind. So how much change? That's the change.
Yeah. That's great. So going back to something between the two of us, I remember I was, maybe grade 12, 11, I was trying to decide what field to go into. And I was, I had the fortunate ability to have a wide variety of fields to pick from. And as you know, I did want to always do business from a young age, I did want to start doing my own business. And I remember I came to you and asked you, and you said something that was very, very interesting and left a mark on me, which is you said that an engineer can become a manager at any time, but a manager can't become an engineer. And I mean, they can. Someone could maybe go back and do school. There's nuances to it. But I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on this quote. And I want you to know that was a very interesting thing for me, and that really got me thinking about what field I could go into to create a firm base that allows me to go anywhere else. And I think I made the right choice into going into engineering, where I was able to create that base.
Okay. Well, thanks for remembering that. I don't remember what I said at the time, but obviously it meant something to you, and I'm glad that you decided to be an engineer. To answer your question, let's look at it this way. What does a manager do? What a manager does is he uses resources, human resources, financial resources, equipment to produce a result. That's what a managers do. And how did they do it? What is the process itself from all these resources to the result, to the product? He makes decisions, hard decisions sometimes. He's got to make them ethically, legally. He's got to look at the data. He has got to have that skill, capability to look at the data. And these days, particularly, he's got to manage, like you said earlier, engineering is becoming multidisciplinary. It is, and so he's got to manage people, experts, specialists from a number of different disciplines. So that's what a manager does. And ultimately, he's got to have that teamwork spirit, keep the team happy to produce a product. Now, in engineering, what does an engineer do? He goes through a rigorous educational process for 4 years. Normally, for graduate study, undergrads 4 years.
4 years.
In most of the places. So to that process for 4 years, and during that period, he learns one of the abilities that he develops is to think logically. That's the core of any engineering. And the second thing he learns is mathematics. In a lot of places these days, I did a little bit of that too. Statistics becomes an important
Yes,
part.
yeah. Especially more so nowadays, a lot.
Yeah, more so nowadays. And managers use statistics quite a lot. That is the core on which they make a lot of their budgetary decisions and then investment decisions and all of that. And so he does that. And then when the engineer comes and starts working, then as a young engineer, he is put through a system where he's got to deal with people. He's got to coordinate with different disciplines. Take, for instance, example, a geotechnical engineer. There is a building project somewhere. The geotechnical guy has got to know what sort of ground the building is going to stand on. So he has got to bore in the ground, find out what kind of soil there is. And that process, he deals with this site investigation contractor. He makes sure that the equipment are right. And then he's got a budget to deal with. There's no unlimited budget for it. He's got a budget to deal with. And he's got to, if he's working for a private company, he's got to make money for the company.
Yes.
So he's exposed to people. He works as a team. He's got to make money for the company. He needs to be good at mathematics because and also on all of that comes from the design that he's involved in, because he designs the product, if you like. And so all the elements that make a manager, as his training and in practice, the engineer is exposed to. And as he goes higher up and starts dealing with bigger and bigger projects, the team gets bigger, the disciplines that he's got to deal with bigger, money is millions of dollars, and he's got to manage all of that. So whether he likes it or not, unless he wants to stay in a corner and do some research, an engineer eventually becomes a manager. So, engineer, but a manager does not, like I said earlier, unless he goes to school, he cannot design. He doesn't know how a structure works. He doesn't know how concrete works. He doesn't know the nitty-gritty of how the plumbing works. But the engineer does. And he also does the management. That is why you'll see in a lot of areas, engineers have become managers, politicians. Jimmy Carter was a nuclear engineer. He became the president of the United States. Herbert Hoover, he was a mining engineer. Now tell me one lawyer or a politician who has become an engineer. So that's the answer.
Yeah. No, that's very well said. Now, kind of going back to now, people who are want to be engineers, and my brother wanted me to ask you this question as well because he's recently starting his career. What are some of the weaknesses you see in kind of new, and not just now, but maybe in the past too, newer graduates that come up, and what do you think that are things that they should be working on for young people as they start their careers?
Well, earlier this morning we sort of touched on the subject. Engineering is, I suppose, the same with a lot of jobs, but it's a very demanding profession. It demands a particular set of skills which requires application of, I think, the highest level of intelligence. It demands managing, like we said before, managing people of different trades, different backgrounds, etc. It's very precise and logical, and to stay at the top of the job. And another risk of engineering, particularly civil engineering, is if something goes wrong, you have millions of dollars you're losing, and nobody likes that.
Yeah.
Money can create a lot of problems. And so engineers, when they start the work, they have, I think, willy-nilly, and it's so creative and so interesting, they absorb themselves into it completely. They get sort of sucked into it. And say that after you have done 47, 50 years of engineering, if you're not careful, you spend 2/3 of your waking hours in doing your work.
Yes.
Engineering, in this case, we're talking about engineering. But there is a big, interesting world outside engineering. And so if you get sucked into it completely, then you live a life in a trench, I say, because you all of that interesting part of you that the world offers you, you're missing out. So engineering is interesting. Go for engineering. It's very creative. Like in my life, engineering, I have been able to travel, see the world, live comfortably, and still practice engineering. So it's a great thing. So go for it. But don't get sucked into it so that all your life becomes nothing but living in that trench, because the world is so much more interesting and enjoyable.
And I would argue also that even if your main purpose in life is the 2/3, that you're so dedicated to your work, even then you should still step outside in order to grow your performance in work, also because you get a brighter perspective on life as well.
Without a doubt.
So I want to transition now from engineering to also related to knowledge, but in terms of reading. So I know that you're quite a voracious reader. You've been reading, and you also have the book club, which you've done for how many years now?
Almost 23 years, 24 years.
Yeah, and so first I want to kind of ask you about, were you always a big reader growing up, or is that something you kind of developed over the years?
I don't say I was a big reader growing up. You said voracious reader. I would like to read. I enjoy reading, but I don't know if I'm a voracious reader. But what whet my interest in reading, what really triggered it, was I was very fortunate to come across a close family member who read, and who was, every time I sat in front of him and started talking to him, he would make reference to so many different things, so many different fields: philosophy, history, religion, politics, literature, you name it, and he would talk almost authoritatively. He had so much knowledge. And I used to sit in front and wonder, how did he know so much? Where did he get all this from? And you used to say, well, I like reading. So that kind of triggered my interest in reading. And I also like I said earlier, the trench living. I want to live outside the trench. I want to connect with the world that I'm living in. I want to be aware of the world that I'm living in. I have a habit of introspection. I want to ask myself, what is really driving me to do what I do every day, the decisions that I made, the things I do. And that understanding myself requires reading again. And so these are the sort of trigger points for me, which led me to read and get interested in reading. And I think in the present day world, you become, if you just focus on what you do, you become a mechanical tool instead of a whole human being.
Yes.
To be a whole, you need to read, you need to connect, you need to understand what's going on around you, and you need to appreciate what other people do, why they do it, even if you want to change them. All of that needs knowledge. all of that needs reading. And so I'm an advocate for reading.
And I'm curious about a little bit more going into tactical. When you approach reading a new book, what's your process? And I'm speaking about things like, is there a particular place you like to read? Are you a note taker? Do you kind of reread back things? Like going down to the nitty gritty, when you're sitting down with a book, what does that look like? Do you like read in a particular time of day? I'm really curious about that.
Well, in the beginning, I used to just read from page one. One of my habits is, like, some people say, "Oh, this paragraph, this chapter didn't interest me, so I skipped over it." I can't do that. Once I open a book, I need to read the whole thing. But then I started realizing that I was not retaining and observing everything I started reading. I was, after I had read. And so there is a book, I don't know the name of the author now, he's a South American author, I think from Argentina, which the title of the book is How to Read. And then it tells you how to read a book. And so I adopt that, his recommendations quite a lot nowadays, and that is, I look at the front page, I look at the back, I look at the comments, get a sense of what the book is all about. And then I try to read a book 2 times at least.
Yes.
First, I just go over it and then try and get a gist of what it's trying to say. What are the logic it's presenting? What's the scene it's describing? And then the second time I read again, I observe, and I learn a lot more, and it becomes so much more enjoyable. So that's my process. And when I read, you would not want to read a book that I have read. Because I make notes. I just destroy the book completely. I scribble all over the books. And I like words, and I like how people play with words. That's one of the things. I don't like Churchill all that much, although the world admires him. But I like the way he used words. His play of words is fantastic. And so, and that's one of the most enjoyable part of reading to me, how people use the same words I use, but so much more effectively and so much more descriptively. And I find that absolutely fascinating.
Awesome. So that's one of the ways you've influenced me too. Is from a young age, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I would attend the book club, and I want to not just read, but read also the books that you were reading and kind of comment on that. I think first of all, it got me more interested in reading, and I think I've read a lot, but I used to read a lot more than I do now. Nowadays, I have to, unfortunately, I allocate time on my calendar as reading blocks, and I want to get better at doing it, but I still do, but not as much as I'd like to. One of the things I learned is to treat a book almost like a textbook when you read it. And that's one of the things I did learn from you, because when we would talk about books after we read them, it wouldn't just be, oh, I read the book, but it'd be what happened, what are the themes, what are the character motivations, how does it relate? And that's something that I think I learned from you at a very, very young age, and it translates very well to so many different areas. So now all of that reading throughout the years is kind of compounded, so that when I look at a new thing now, it's a very effective ability, and a lot of people have it, and they try to learn it now later, and you can learn it later. But the compounding at an early age is a much better effect for being able to retain information. And not just me, but I know there are some kids now that well who I'm talking about, but they're very big readers at a very young age, and it's very impressive to see them.
I find, to me, it's very satisfying that some of the kids who have grown up with our book club, some of the kids who participate in it now, they have become quite remarkable, actually, outstanding in so many ways. So it's a good thing. But I want to add one more. I want to add one comment on what you said about not having time to read, and that's what everybody says. There's so much to do, so you just don't have the time. And my rebuttal to that is, every year, Obama publishes 10 books that he read. if Obama can do it and find time, anybody can do it. Just
Yes.
make time.
Yeah.
He's got 24 hours, you got 24 hours, I got 24 hours. It's the discipline and the time. That's all that's required.
No, and that's one thing for me personally. That's the way I did it because I did want to, go back to those days where I was reading a lot more. So the key thing for me, and maybe this will help people out there, is I blocked off time in my calendar that's dedicated reading time. Just like a meeting, anything else, it's now reading time. And now that it's been blocked off, there is time for it. And I think that might be effective for people
Good. That's
these
something
days.
I hope other kids learn from you because that's very important.
And so going a little bit one more step into reading is the other thing that I learned from you is also rereading. And I remember the first time this came up is back when I first read the book Animal Farm.
Oh, yeah.
And you told me, this is a book that throughout your life in different stages, you'll want to reread it again and again. And I try and read it. I do try and read it once every 2 years. I say I read it. Sometimes I read it once every year because it's short. It's short, but you get a lot of insight on it. And because of that, I've also tried to reread things, not just right away to kind of read like a textbook, but read it later on again and see how my perspective has changed. So one thing I'm doing this year is I'm only reading 2 new books in this upcoming year, 2023. And all the other stuff, I'm going back and rereading a couple things because I feel I've had a lot of personal growth in the past 2-3 years. And now I want to tackle some of these books I read a little bit earlier than that from a different perspective. So I've kind of blocked off for no new books. There are 2 that I want to read. One has been on my list for a while. And the other one is one that is coming out that I'm excited for. Other than that, I'm only going to be rereading. So I look forward to kind of telling you about that when.
Oh, I'll look forward to listen to what you have to say because that's Animal Farm is a great book. I think I've
That's a
read it
great
a few
book, yeah.
times too. Yes, it's fantastic. The book I'm rereading it's almost become a Bible to me, The Sapiens.
Ah, yes, Sapiens.
And then Sapiens and Guns, Germs and Steel. Because I like history. I want to know how we got where we are. We are not like the ball in a catapult where you just pull the string and it goes. We're not that. There is a whole history behind us, and I want to know that. And those books are just so good for it.
Yeah.
And I read, and it just become Bible to me. It's good. So. Yeah, I'm glad you took an interest in reading, and you've got time slot now separated for reading, and that's great. I hope other kids do the same.
I hope so too.
There's no excuse for saying I have no time.
Yeah, no, you can make it. You can make it for sure. The other thing I want to touch on is a little bit different, but you're seeing the automation that's happening these days. Whether that's in jobs, in technology, you're seeing it a lot in software and things of that nature. What's kind of your take on how the economy might be affected by automation of jobs? Because I find 2 camps. One is alarmists. They say, oh, all of our jobs are going to be taken by AI. We're not going to be doing anything. We'll be jobless. There's that camp, which is one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is this is all hype. And I'm someone who's kind of more in the middle that think that there are use cases and we're going to be transitioning our jobs and our roles instead of having it completely overtaken. But what do you think?
Well, 2 things. One is, automation is there potentially to make us human beings more productive. To make our life easier, if you like. You don't have to walk the whole, through the whole house to do your vacuum cleaning. There is that robot now which does a lot for you.
Roomba, yeah.
Yeah, you can just sit on the sofa and watch your television and let it do the work. And yet, people seem to be dying of work because there seems to be so much more and more, and the work never seems to stop. But the point is to your question of what I think about automation is, I have mixed feelings, like you say. Automation is good as long as it is under your control. One of the things that people talk about AI is it can think itself, it can do a lot of things and do these iterations, permutations, combinations to make the right decision in a difficult situation on its own, with human beings just being on the side as an onlooker. Now that scenario I find frightening, because automation is good as long as it is under your control. But when automation starts controlling your life, then you are not human being that we know. You're something else. And so if you want to remain a human being, as you are, if you like human beings as they are now, then make sure that the automation is under your control all the time. You have to remember, science is, I'm a student of science. I lived my life applying science as an engineer to produce things, to do things, to construct. But science can be highly destructive and worrying. And why do I say that? Just think of some of the greatest scientific thinkers. The fellow Oppenheimer, the fellow he became a pacifist, as you know. He was very worried that what he produced could be misused. He didn't think he was doing something to kill people, but that's... Albert Einstein became a pacifist. Martin Ryle, I don't know whether you know him, but he's a British Nobel Prize winner, and he was the first one to discover the radio waves. And he's written a wonderful little, before he died, small pamphlet about 20 pages long, which is once again expressing his concern and worry with where science was going. Mm-hmm. So automation is great, but don't let it go to an extent that it starts controlling you. Keep it under your control to work for you. Like alcohol is good once in a while, but being an alcoholic is not all that great. So it's the same thing. Don't let alcohol control you. Don't let automation control you. You'll be all right. That's my view.
That's great. So Uncle, so one last question that I always ask everybody is, so do you have any questions for me?
No, I think you are doing great. You're on the right track, but never forget that you are a human being and your ultimate goal is to serve the human race. Not by exploiting others, but the best you can, keeping the balance with everything else, with Earth, with other fellow human beings. That is the best thing. But you're doing well. You think, and the one advice I'll give to everybody is develop a habit of introspection, because it helps you.
Yes.
You over the period of time, every day, in business and whatever you do, you make so many decisions at the spur of the moment, sometimes reflexively, and but there is a driver inside you which makes you make that decision. Have you compromised your humanity when you make that decision? Think in those terms and ask yourself, why did I do something? As long as your conscience is clear, you're happy with it, that's the way to go.
Beautifully said. I think that's the best way to kind of conclude this. Thank you so much, Uncle, for coming on. This is a great talk and great catch up as well.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Gostou lá.